You ready? Good evening. Welcome to Empower You. I'm Betty Overstreet. Can you believe this is the end of March and that we're halfway through all of our classes? It seems like we just started. Anyway, want to remind you that all of our classes are posted to the website within 24 hours, usually earlier than that, the next day. So if you miss a class or you want to send somebody back to watch a class, it will be posted. We also are posting them to Rumble and YouTube, but I think that takes a couple of days. Want to thank all of you who have been so generously donating. As you know, we can only do this by your donations. So I know times are tough, and if you listen to the radio or news or whatever you listen to, things aren't going to get any better. So we do appreciate what you've been giving. If you're new to Empower You and you'd like to donate something, when you sign up online for a class, there's a donate button on there. There's a donate button on our website. And if you don't like to donate that kind of way, you can send a check to our physical address, which you will find on our website also. Of course, if you're in the classroom here, we always pass around our red bucket. If you can afford $1 or $2, it's much appreciated. Tonight, when our speaker takes questions, if you would please raise your hand and wait for one of us to bring a microphone to you so that the people behind you can hear what you're saying, and especially the people online can't hear if you're not talking into a microphone. I want to talk a little bit about the upcoming classes we have. We're having a Saturday class this week. Jim Lewis and John Hendry will be here talking about the sovereign duty of the state legislatures. Would you agree the federal government is constantly violating the Constitution, as well as the rights of the states and us, we the people? Would you agree that they're doing that? Our founders left us directions on how to combat the federal government when they overstep their bounds. Come and see the presentation and find out the solutions that were put in place by our founders. That's what's happening on Saturday. It will be from 10 to 11:30, and I hope you'll come. Next Tuesday, April 5th, Rick Gibbs will be here, and he's going to be talking about being prepared for shortages in this political climate. If you listen to Glenn Beck, I know there's others that talk about it, but as I've said before, I'm a big Glenn Beck fan, so he talks about it almost on a daily basis, which is a little disconcerting in a way, about how we need to be prepared in case of an emergency. We need to be putting food on our shelves and stuff. And it makes me think of a friend of mine that she lives in an apartment in a high rise right on Panama Beach. But every year in hurricane season, she has to have 3 days worth of food, clothes, whatever it is, and be ready to go when they're expecting a hurricane. So, you know, she's acclimated to it, but when you live in the Midwest like this, you don't really think about things happening, but I think we're in a time where we're going to have to start thinking about it. Leanne Cartier, one of our producers, is also going to be speaking that night, and she's going to give you some tips on gardening if you want to raise your own vegetables, when to start, and the kind of things to grow. And if you have a small space, she's going to give you some tips on how to grow things in a small space. Next Thursday, we are going to have our Board of Election tour. So if you're one of those people that's a little skeptical whether or not our elections are being run right, fair, whatever, I don't know that they're going to be able to answer that question. But if you want to go on the tour, at least you'll be able to see the facility. I think they're actually going to kind of give us a mock election, but they're going to go through the whole process of what they do. We had to cap that class at 50. We have 27 signed up now. So if you're interested in going, I encourage you to go on and sign up soon. Week after next, Tuesday, April 12th, Annie Cyrus is going to be here, and we have that labeled Annie's Story. Annie is a young gal. She was born in Iran. She was sold at the age of 13 to an older man by her father. At the age of 15, her grandmother was able to smuggle her out of Iran. We talk about freedom here in America. When you talk to somebody like Annie, we take our freedom for granted. We really do. Even though we think we don't, we do. You have no idea what it's like for somebody like her. She's going to be here telling her story. She's going to talk about what life is like in Iran, or in that part of the country, I should say, for women, and what it's like overall, the differences between that part of the world and this part of the world. She's very interesting. I had the opportunity to have lunch with her, so I'm really excited to have her here and hear more about what she's also doing as an activist here in America to make things better for us. Then on Thursday, April 14th, Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller is going to be here, and he's going to be talking about the accountability for our military and our political leadership. I've asked many people, or when I get a chance, I ask people if they know who he is, and I'm surprised how many people don't know who Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller is. How many in here know who I'm talking about? Not very many of you. He was the young man, if you will remember, a few months ago, oh, well, it was last year sometime. Well, it was right after not right after the Afghan withdrawal, but shortly thereafter. He's the young Marine who posted a video to YouTube in his uniform, in his office, asking for accountability from leadership about the Afghan withdrawal. Stuart was a 17-year veteran. He's 3 years away from retirement. Retirement 20 years from the military when you're a young person, that's a big deal. So I'm interested, I've talked to Stuart, but not in depth. I've heard him talk on different programs. He's been on a lot of TV programs. He's been on many radio programs. Maybe you've heard him. But I'm interested to hear his story on what brought him to the point to make that decision. I know if you're a military person, you may not agree with him because there is that military code. It might be called the code of silence, I'm not sure. But I know there is a code in the military where you just don't, talk about things like that. But he made the decision to step outside that code. So I admire him for it because our men and women joined the military to fight for our country. And in my opinion, I've never been in the military. I got a granddaughter in the military, but I've not been in there myself. But as a citizen, I feel like what he did, he was still fighting for our country. And at this point, so put those dates on your calendar. I hope you'll be here. And at this time, I'm going to have Dan come up and take over.
Welcome, everyone. Good evening to you. We're so glad to have you here tonight. Got so many people online tonight for our great classes. And I'm so excited that Jed Hartings could come from Cincinnati Classical tonight to be with us. We talked to him, I think, what was it, about a year or two ago during pandemic, and to see what he's done has been incredible. So we're going to do the giveaway between Jed and our speaker, Tom Hagedorn. So just want to introduce you to the team. Would you guys say thank you to Betty Overstreet, our executive director, and Bill Roll, our treasurer, and Leanne Cartier, and Barb Horowitz, our board members here. Hi, Barb. Thank you for coming. So our friend Don Hurd, who sings the Star Spangled Banner for us occasionally, got a hold of us today and said that he had a couple of free tickets. I think he said 4 tickets to this National Men's Conference Saturday down at UC. Looks like a great event. I think the most well-known speaker is Raymond Arroyo from Fox News, and there's a couple other good ones. So if any of you are interested in those tickets, you can grab a flyer and catch me on the way out, and we'll see if we can get you the tickets. It's from 8:30 to 2:30 p.m. Now that does conflict with an Empower You session, but I think it's all for a good cause, right? The Board of Election Tour, we've had so many people talk to us about elections over the last couple of years. We've got, I think, 20 spots left on that tour. If you're interested in going down there, that's next Thursday. We'll meet down there. That should be fun. Our required reading tonight, you may have seen the story about it in the news, but the required reading, it's also a link tonight on the website, protect the kids at all costs. And this discusses Daily Wire's new initiative to spend $100 million on kids programming that is not contrary to our culture. Their kind of tagline is, to impact culture, you must help create it. And the Daily Wire is putting their money where their mouth is, which is incredible. And they're doing it for one reason only, and that's to counter the Walt Disney Corporation, which needs some kind of a bumper to it. So I've got these articles for you. Bill will give them to you on the way out. I keep hitting you all with articles about culture and not trying to kind of slow you down with those articles because some of them aren't that positive, but really I'm sending in the message for one reason. Our culture is changing just so fast. It's changing so fast in front of our very eyes. If we don't catch it, it's going to be very, very different. So this is one more article about that. So I wanted to have John O'Neill come up. John has been the person who has been responsible for our Take 20 series, which is kind of our 20-minute segments at the start of our Empower You classes. And John is going to introduce our first speaker. So can you guys thank John for his work on Empower You? Thanks, John.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. At our class on Tuesday of this week, Kirsten Hill, a member of the Ohio State Board of Education, updated us on the insertion of social emotional learning, SEL, into our school system. Academics are being diluted while schools have been turned into places that conduct behavioral therapy on children. While the effort to do this has become more pronounced in the last couple of years, it is by no means a new program. This has been in the development and implementation stages for decades. I have here a book that was published in 1999. Its title is Storm Warning, and the subtitle is The Coming of Persecution of Christians and Traditionalists in America. Chapter six in this book is titled Attacking Parental Rights, the Global Socialists Want Your Children. One quote in this chapter is, and I'll read this to you, children belong to the general family, to the state, before belonging to private families. And a paragraph at the early part of this chapter states, that the communists, the socialists of the French Revolution, the Nazis, and today's socialists knew that if they could gain control of children and their minds, if they could separate children from the anti-socialist, the reactionary, the traditional religious influence of their parents and families, that they could control the next generation and those to follow it. Then they could control the future. An attendee at our meeting on Tuesday night asked Kirsten Hill, what can we do to fight off the attack of our children's minds? Well, tonight, our first speaker of the evening, Jed Hartings, founding member and board president of Cincinnati Classical Academy, is here to introduce one approach that is being taken to provide families with an alternative to the SEL programming being implemented in our school system. Jed will discuss the emerging growth of public classical charter schools as an education alternative in Ohio, with focus on the experience founding the Cincinnati Classical Academy. He will describe the core tenets of the classical approach to education and how they differ from today's public schools. with the illustrations from school curricula. He will discuss what's required to found a school, the experiences and challenges, the partnership with Hillsdale College, and related funding efforts across the state. That should be founding efforts across the state. Jed grew up on the west side of Cincinnati and attended St. Xavier High School. He graduated from the University of Notre Dame and earned a doctorate in neuroscience from the University of Pittsburgh. He then served 8 years as a medical research officer in the U.S. Army at Walter Reed, separating from service at the rank of major. Jed returned home in 2008 to join the faculty at the University of Cincinnati, where he researches stroke and brain trauma as a tenured professor in the Department of Neurosurgery. He lives with his wife and daughters in Evendale. He enjoys running motorcycles, classical music, politics, and reading, and hopes one day to sail the Great Lakes with his family. Ladies and gentlemen, Jed Hartings.
Thanks a lot, John.
Thank you.
And thank you for Dan and Empower You for having me tonight to talk about this, our efforts to found the Cincinnati Classical Academy. Education's obviously been a very hot topic nationally and locally in the past couple years. And I want to thank everything that you've done here through Empower You and individually to help expose what's been, and a lot of people taking action in Columbus to expose what's been happening in schools and to fight back against it and reform the schools that we have now. What I want to do tonight is spotlight a different approach to reforming education in the country. And that approach is simply create new schools. And this sort of follows in the approach taken by the founders of the University of Austin. And I don't know if you've heard about this or not, but if you haven't, check it out. It's a pretty cool initiative by a lot of prominent thought leaders throughout the country to set up a new university. And their philosophy was very simple. We simply can't wait for universities to fix themselves. In fact, they're not even heading in that direction. They're becoming more illiberal every day. So we're starting a new one. So that's what we've done here with Cincinnati Classical Academy. And before I talk about some of those things that John mentioned, let me start with just a general school overview. So the Academy, which is going to be, it is a community school. That's what Ohio calls charter schools. So it's funded by the state of Ohio, and it's tuition free for any Ohio residents who wish to attend. We are partnering with Hillsdale College. They have a K-12 program. They provide the curriculum. I'll explain what that partnership looks like. So we're going to be opening for our first school year this fall, and beginning with grades kindergarten through 6th grade. And then every year after that, we'll add an additional grade until we're eventually a K-12 school. So this year, 6th graders will eventually be our first graduating class going off to life in college. We are going to have 450 students beginning this fall. And so we're pretty much at capacity. There may be a few spots left in a couple grades, but we have a robust waiting list already. So we're very pleased to have gotten to this point. This is the school location. John's already shown some pictures. We're going to locate at the former Our Lady of the Sacred Heart school and campus, which is in Reading. It's about 8 miles from here. It's a beautiful 30-acre campus with a schoolhouse, a gym, and there's a church there now, which they're going to be leaving soon. So we might be able to use the church as an auditorium. And this shows the enrollment and from where the families and students that are going to attend this fall are located. And you can see the really wide geographic distribution here. We've got over 50 different zip codes sending students to our school in the fall, from Hamilton all the way over to Lebanon and down south to New Richmond. We've even had families that are moving from Kentucky to Ohio so they can attend, and other families moving down from Mercer County, Ohio to Hamilton County in order to attend the school. And I think that this speaks not necessarily to our success as school founders, but to the incredible demand there is for an alternative to not only the public schools, but even the private schools in the area, because our enrollment is coming from all sectors, from homeschooling, from public schools, and from a lot of the most prominent private schools in greater Cincinnati. So as a classical charter school, we are part of two kind of large movements in the country, where the charter school movement is obviously gaining steam. It's been gaining steam every year since Ohio charter law was passed in 1997, and continues to have favorable improvements in the legislature every year. So that's gone on a positive trajectory. The other one is the classical school trajectory. And I wasn't aware that this was going on because it hasn't received so much attention in the national press and in the national media. But the classical school movement is one that's been growing over the past 20 years. And that includes in the private sector, the homeschool sector, as well as in the public charter sector. So there's a network of private classical Christian schools, Catholic classical schools, homeschooling. There's a group called Classical Conversations where they get together once or maybe twice a week to get together. And I had no idea, but that's a really popular option for a lot of local families. But when it comes to public charter schools, there are two main networks that I'm aware of. One is the Great Hearts Academy, which operates primarily in Arizona and Texas. And then there's Hillsdale College, which partners with schools all throughout the country. So Hillsdale College was our natural choice for a partner for our school. So what does Hillsdale College do? Well, they started this K through 12 initiative about 12 years ago in order to promote the founding of classical charter schools and help guide them towards excellence in their teaching and operation. And so what Hillsdale does is they provide support to their member schools at no cost. They don't pay their schools anything, and no dollars change hands in either direction. So what do they provide? Most importantly, they provide a K through 12 curriculum right here. So there's no mysteries about what goes on at these schools. It's a thick book. We call it the Hillsdale Bible. You can look up chapter and verse. This is the number one benefit. This was developed by Hillsdale College professors, and it's been refined through over 10 years of use at their member schools. They also help us with hiring of faculty, with professional development for the board, for teachers, for staff, et cetera. And the program's been enormously successful since it launched 10 years ago. There's now over 25 schools affiliated with Hillsdale throughout the country, all public charter schools in very many states. And what's impressive is here, you can see the enrollment number of over 14,000, but notice also the wait list of over 8,000 students trying to get into these schools. So they're very successful, in high demand, any place people seem to set them up. So what were the challenges associated with creating this school? And I've just highlighted sort of 4 here, but the biggest one is right there on top. It's finding a small group of volunteers to do the hard grunt work of setting up the school. We started with 6 founders, and we've stuck with 6. And this has been, it's an enormous amount of work, at least for a few of us, consistently 20 to 30 hours per week. So this is the biggest hurdle. It's volunteerism. It's finding the right person at the right stage in life with the right opportunity, with some professional skills, who has a passion and an understanding of what the mission is and what's trying to be accomplished. Bring them together to just really do a lot of the grunt work. And part of that is fundraising. We figured it would take about $200,000. A couple of years ago, we set out that goal, and it turned out to be pretty accurate. We were able to raise that amount of money, but it's been a lot of work because we don't have a big backer like the Lindners or the Farmer family. I think our largest donor was $25,000. So we've had to piece that together through time. The other two, and most of the work that goes into founding the school is It just requires effort. There are no obstacles that can't be overcome, but there are two that sort of are really essential and require a little bit of luck as well. And that's identifying a school location and property, and also identifying a principal, or as we call him, the headmaster. So those are the main challenges. And then in the bucket of things that I would just consider annoying, there is pushback from the public as well. You know, a lot of misinformation on social media about who we are and what we do. People accuse us of privateering and being cash cows and draining money from public schools, none of which is true. If there's a way to privateer and make money off this, I haven't discovered it yet. All of our founding members have given large amounts of money to the school. So Hillsdale doesn't make money, we don't make money. So these people are pretty imaginative. And then of course you get some colorful comments from others as well who, you know, like to throw out their favorite slurs at us. So what is classical education, and why is this an attractive alternative for those who are more conservatively or traditionally minded? Let me throw up just a few brief talking points about what classical education is. And the first one there is a little bit grandiose, but nonetheless, this is really the true end game, which is to preserve Western civilization, to hold on to those things that have worked in our history and pass them on to the next generation so that the nation can continue to prosper. Classical education aims to instill in people objective standards for goodness, truth, beauty, weightiness, correctness. And so it rejects the idea of moral relativism that is so prevalent in education and throughout culture today. It aims to instill moral character and civic virtue. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we do that. So it's very much values-based, although it's not religious, it is values-based. Classical education employs a content-rich curriculum. I'll explain what that means. And it's in the classical liberal arts, so not modern liberalism, but liberalism in the classical sense of imparting the knowledge and the thinking and the philosophy and the personal virtues that are required for individuals to govern themselves and flourish in a free society where they're free to do so. Classical education relies on teachers. It relies on human beings as role models providing instruction. This is very different than what we see in the classrooms today, where the trend is to be a one-to-one school. And probably some of you know what that is. It means one-to-one computer to student. So what you see are kids hunched over their laptops, you know, going through a program that's teaching them. Well, that computer is not serving as a role model to that student. Or you see other classrooms where the students are grouped together in pods and they're teaching each other and exploring together and doing these creative exercises, but they're not learning anything. They're not being taught and led by a teacher who's knowledgeable and passionate about their own subject matter. And we try to teach how to think, not what to think. So another way of looking at this is classical education is simply traditional education. It's what education always was until about 100 years ago. It's traditional in the purpose, meaning the purpose of education is to prepare students to live a meaningful life. It's not just to train them to get a job. The methods, books and pencils. We like to annotate and take notes, you know, in the books that we read. We value recitation, memorization. We use primary source documents so students can learn directly from the great minds who wrote their thoughts down. Socratic dialogue. So you don't see computers in there. And then the subject matters are traditional as well. And I can touch on these briefly. in a lot of schools today, they don't teach phonics anymore and they don't teach grammar. Not teaching phonics as the way to read has been sort of an experiment where they've gone instead to this whole word or whole language approach to teaching reading, where they might show a word and then show a picture of that word, like a picture of a cat and then CAT. And the students are simply asked to memorize the appearance of the word without being taught the sound of k, a, t. So this doesn't work. Grammar, they say, why do we have to teach grammar anymore? We have spell correction, we have Grammarly programs on our computers, so kids don't need to know it anymore. We take a different approach where we teach explicit phonics, grammar, and sentence diagramming so that we understand the structure and proper grammar. We understand how the subject relates to the verb, what a prepositional phrase is, what are the parts of speech, what's a gerund, etc. We also teach Latin for a number of reasons, but this also helps with understanding English grammar, because you're forced to take those parts of grammar and do it in a different language. So you can't do that unless you understand it in your native language. Singapore math. Singapore has led the world for 40 years in the math performance of its students. So they have a full curriculum that Hillsdale has adopted. History and geography. You'll notice you don't see social studies there. Social studies is a little bit of a perturbation of the traditional approach of actually teaching the things that happened. We teach history through storytelling, which inspires students. We expect them to learn dates, to know the names of people, learn about the actual facts, rather than drifting off into sort of social commentary and giving students an article from CNN to read and make them feel like they're smart when they take that home to their parents and say, we're reading CNN. Oh, what a good job, Johnny. We use classic literature. These are the great books. They're time tested. They're classics for a reason. We're not just going to throw them out, although Common Core gets rid of almost all of them and moves our students away from classic literature to, quote, informational texts like government publications. Science, we're not a STEM school. We do not take the approach of just trying to teach science so that you know how to make new gadgets or because you want to get a job in tech. We teach science for the appreciation and beauty and the goodness of nature and the natural world, because that approach inspires wonder, awe, and genuine interest, real learning. Music and the visual arts, they're not extras in the classical curriculum. In fact, music is one of the 7 original liberal arts as defined through the medieval period. So it's central to the curriculum. Our students will take 2.5 music classes per week. They're expected to actually learn music. And as an example, here's a music curriculum for first semester, first quarter of the 6th grade. And I show this in this detail to illustrate what we mean by a content-rich curriculum. Content-rich means we expect students to learn things, not just sort of, quote, skills, but to actually have knowledge that fills their head, because it's hard to think well with an empty mind. And so in music, we expect them to learn the theory, the notation, the terminology. We expect them to learn and recognize various composers, various pieces of various compositions, etc. And here's just another example of sort of the content-rich nature. This is 3rd grade history, where first semester where they study the Vikings in Rome, and you can see all the topics, the names and the places that students are expected to learn. Of course, they're not going to master this in the 3rd grade, but they're going to be exposed to it, and they're going to start to learn it, and they're going to realize that it's important. So when they encounter it again in 9th grade, they'll really get it. And I have to mention, of course, Hillsdale 1776 curriculum, which was a response to the 1619 project. It's an American history and civics curriculum, 2,400 pages long, free, made it free and available to the entire country to download. So check that out if you're interested in what content rich is. We'll be the only school in Cincinnati using this curriculum. core virtues are very important to instill in our students. These are our 7 core virtues. We instill them through teacher example and through the literature that we read. And I'm just about done, 2 more slides. So this is the second last one. Another feature of the classical curriculum is that the core curriculum is very strong. There's not a lot of room for electives because there's a lot of important fundamental things that students need to learn before they graduate high school. And so there's required 4 years of literature, ancient, medieval, American, 4 years of history, ancient, European, American, modern. Then there's, leading up to American government, 1.5 years of moral and political philosophy, which together with the European history and the early American history are absolutely necessary to have any understanding of what happened around 1776. So you need those as antecedents. You'll also see their economics, logic, rhetoric, all of the classic subject matters that have always been considered essential to be an educated citizen. This is the type of education that our founding fathers had. It's about time we start passing that along to our future generations if we want to perpetuate our democracy. So finally, let me just show you the growth of the Hillsdale schools in Ohio. Cincinnati school follows Toledo as the first school founded in 2019. And since our initiative, there have been 4 more schools that have come into the pipeline for founding within the next couple of years: Athens, Columbus, Cleveland, and a second one in Toledo. So we're potentially going to have 6 schools in Ohio by 2024. And Hillsdale is, and this is happening all over the country. As a last example, then I'm done. Tennessee is looking to add 50 Hillsdale charter schools. They actually requested 100, but Larry Arnn, Hillsdale's president, said, we can't do that. Why not? Because there aren't enough qualified minds in this country to lead 100 schools. We don't have 100 qualified school leaders that could pass through Hillsdale's selection process. So we need to change this. We need to and be able to accommodate that and for future generations and allow this growth. I think that we're accelerating beyond the linear period of growth for charter and classical movement, and we're reaching exponential growth. I'd like to think we're at the start of a mini American Renaissance. Let's all hope so. Thank you so much for listening.
Let's give Jed a round of applause. Thank you, Jed. That is so exciting. Quick question. If somebody out there has a student that wants to get on the waiting list, what do they do?
Just go to our website and click on the enrollment tab at the top of the page.
And about this curriculum right here. So the Enquirer, Jed, told me that when they talked about an editorial about one of the legislators up in Columbus decided to try to make a law that all schools would have to publish their curriculum online. The Enquirer told us that was impossible to do. Were they wrong about that, or? I think that's fantastic.
I think you know the answer. Yeah. No, we're proud of it. That's why we bring it everywhere we go.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for coming tonight. Now that is exciting. We're going to do a couple quick giveaways. I'm going to ask our other speaker, Tom, to draw one ticket out of there for me. Get your ticket out. And the winner is number, how about 033? 03. Now you already won. We're throwing you out, I guess. So in Springdale, a business that's been seriously hurt by the pandemic, Showcase Cinema gift cards. So let's give Dave a round of applause. And online, we've got a winner too. Kind of a fun book of somebody who's super interesting, Tim Tebow, Mission Possible. And the winner is Deborah W. And Deborah, let's give Deborah a round of applause. We'll get that to her. So Tom Hagedorn is our next speaker, and Tom and I got to know each other pretty well last year when we worked on education in Ohio with a lot of other people. Tom has been studying American history for over 30 years. Some of his studies focused on education. 8 years ago, he published a book, Founding Zealots, which is in our library right over here if anybody wants to read it. And that's how evangelistics created America's first public schools. It tells how those schools came about. Since he's published the book, he's been focusing on the role of socialism and socialists in American institutions. Thomas also in his side life provides investment advice. When he's not researching and studying history, he's involved in various political, charitable, and community activities. And he's active in so many things and provides so many things to so many community organizations around the greater Cincinnati area. Tom Hagedorn. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. All right, can you hear me okay in the back? All right. Terrific. Thank you, Dan, for the introduction. There we go. Okay. So, all right, The Forgotten Man. That's this book right here, a little show and tell, and The Great Society. So these are kind of jumping off points for my talk tonight. This is where I got a lot of the information out of these two tremendous books. But we're going to start with the subtitle to my talk. How did America get one step from socialism? So there's an assumption there, right, that we're one step from socialism. So are we really one step from socialism? Let's take a look. So in 1888, Marx and Engels laid out the basic principles of Marxism in the Communist Manifesto. Small book, really easy to read and pretty straightforward, actually. And in 1912, the American Socialist Party adopted a platform. They had candidates for presidency. So they had a platform like any other party. And this was under the leadership of its founder and 5-time presidential candidate, Eugene Debs. Eugene Debs. Remember back to that. And fasten your seatbelts. This tour of the 20th century up to the 21st is going to move pretty fast. As long as I can advance it. All right, there we go. So, Communist Manifesto, 1848. What did it say? Quotes, by the way, almost. First of all, called for free love, which is basically sex and cohabitation of marriage. No more family. No more family. That's right in their words, what they say. Complete victory of the working class in the battle of democracy. And by that they meant total victory, no surrender, no, multiple parties. No, they win through democracy and then they take over. And that's actually what they've done in a lot of countries. No private property, heavy graduated or progressive income taxes, absolute bank, absolute control over communications, with all of these items, everything I've mentioned so far, leading to one thing at the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. So what did that Socialist Party platform of 1912 say? So here was the agenda items that they had achieved by 1920 in 8 years. 1913, Federal Reserve Bank with control of money and banking. Same year, Department of Labor established. Same year, graduated income tax put into place. 1916, estate taxes. 1920, by 1920, 42 states had implemented workers' compensation, and now we have 49 states. And I'm just presenting almost all facts. Obviously, I do have a point of view because of the facts that I have assembled and that I'm presenting here. I'm not saying all these programs are bad, but I'm saying the whole program, the summary is very bad. The program in toto is very bad. So they kept achieving things, the socialists, from that platform of 1912. A number of them under FDR. 1935, unemployment benefits. Same year, Social Security. Now, the socialists only wanted Social Security funded with company contributions. They did not want the worker to have to contribute anything into Social Security. 1938, the minimum wage, which, by the way, almost every study by economists has shown that it hurts the people that is supposedly trying to help. It hurts low-wage people. That's been proven. As a group. It benefits some, but it ends up increasing unemployment. 1938 minimum, I'm sorry, repeated that. 1953, the Department of Health. 1980, a Department of Education was established. By the way, I thought it was interesting, a lot of the comments, what I'm going to talk right now, there are connections between several things that prior speakers have said from this podium tonight. Okay, so what items are open still on that agenda? This will be interesting. Kind of tie this in your mind quickly to what progressives and socialists are calling for right now. So they have legal agenda items, all right? The Constitution was only to be amended by a majority of voters in a majority of states. In other words, the Constitution was to be put up to vote. It was going to be a popular thing, not something that's a foundation that's hard to change. This is amazing. The could no longer declare a law unconstitutional. That goes back to Marbury versus Madison, 1803. They didn't want that. This all points to watering down and controlling the courts, the federal court system. The end of all federal district and appellate courts. And then all judges were to be elected to short terms. So what does that do? That gives you control, right? Short term, they're running for election. Judges start rendering political decisions, not a decision based upon justice. Okay, they had some political items. They did have many desirable civil liberties and workplace reforms. No question about it. Some of them were very laudable. They called for direct election of the president and vice president, elimination of the electoral college. Heard that a little bit lately, haven't we? Abolition of the Senate. Okay, skipped. Okay, don't want to press down too hard on this. All right, so now I'm sorry, but I don't want to drop you down in 1929, which is where these books start. And actually, they do give a little bit of the predecessor, but we're gonna look at the 1920s. What came before the Depression? Because there's a real story here. When they started, they weren't roaring, they were pretty bad. We had a very bad recession. It's even called, some call it the Forgotten Depression, right after World War I, which is very common after a war because an economy has to expand very quickly for the war, and then the men are away. Sorry, it's mostly men. Men are away, and so they're not able to farm, right? So then in an agrarian society, they come back, and all of a sudden we've got this. We have a depression. We have a lot less spending, and we have a depression. And we had a really bad economic time right after World War I. Harding comes into office 1921, the much maligned Harding, which is very unfair. He comes in 1921. What does he do? He looks at this and he says, we're going to slash federal taxes. We're going to slash, and he really did, really cut federal spending. We're going to really reduce our federal debt, and we're going to really cut regulation. In other words, reverse a lot of what Wilson did. He dies in 1923. Silent Cal Coolidge comes in 1923, gets reelected in 24, so he's president for the next 5 years. He keeps those laissez-faire, leave alone, let the economy do its thing, policies in place. So what was the result? You could really fairly describe it as unparalleled prosperity, unparalleled. Low employment, only 2%. Unemployment, sorry. Literally no inflation. I mean, barely above zero. High GDP growth. Imagine this. If you're familiar with the numbers that get reported now, 7% a year. 7% a year GDP. They really were roaring 20s, weren't they? A soaring stock market, up 350%, budget surpluses, and a reduction of the national debt. Now, if you read any historian from at least the last 50 years, the roaring, and you see the stuff that's like popular history, oh boy, the roaring 20s, such excesses, yeah, gosh, that was just terrible. All that prosperity, all those people. It looks like we got a low battery here on this, but anyway, I can work off of that if I have to. Right, so let's see. Come on. All right, so now what happens? Well, what we find is the left works with crises. All right, so we had a stock market panic. GDP. We had soaring unemployment. Sorry, I can read off of both. Hoover and Congress, however, what they did was, instead of following a laissez-faire approach, Hoover and Congress reversed the policies of Harding and Harding and Coolidge that had worked. Basically, what they did was FDR light. So they raised taxes, spending, and these geniuses started a trade war, a worldwide trade war called the Smoot-Hawley tariffs that drastically reduced exports and imports around the world. And the Federal Reserve, made a genius, raised interest rates, something that you do to slow an economy. This is what they did for an economy that was already slowing. Okay, so incomes are. What does FDR do? Let's see. You know what? I think, hold on just a second. That's great. Is this the advance in those two? Oh, okay. I might not be. Doesn't want to. Oh, there we go. Okay. Boy, I'm sorry. I guess I don't know I haven't been operating this correctly, but let's see. Did we do this slide? We did the political. I think I might have skipped a couple. So anyway, I hope you can reel this back in your mind and rewind. I'm going to try to do it as well. All right, so they called for the Socialist Party platform, and if I'm repeating this, let me know. I don't think I am this time, but they called for the end of capitalism. So that was collective ownership of all transportation, communication, and large industries. They called for collective ownership of the banking and currency systems. They called for public ownership of mines, oil wells, forests, and water power, dams. They called for collective ownership of land where practical, all of which, and they quote, but preparation of the, here's their end game, the American socialists, to seize the whole powers of government, workers' inheritance. And I'm sorry for having to jump back and forth. I apparently wasn't pointing this in the right direction. So my apologies, but I want you to get the whole story. All right, so the book, the author of the books, Amity Slaves. All right, so Amity, just a second, she is an acclaimed author. Just take a second. She's an acclaimed author. She's an economic historian who has worked for Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Forbes, the Council on Foreign Relations. These books have been praised by, these two particular books have been praised by Steve Forbes, Alan Greenspan, Peggy Noonan, the Financial Times, New York Review of Books, and Kirkus Reviews. Kirkus is a very well recognized site operation that reviews books, and people really want, if you're an author, you really want a good review with Kirkus. So the two books, The Forgotten Man and The Great Society. Both books are very granular. They're day-by-day accounts of the people and events that shape the politics and economics of these momentous periods. 974 pages in all. You've got two doorstop type books, which are great. They're actually pretty good, but like I say, you know, it depends on what your taste is in books. I've read them both, so you don't have to, okay? Isn't that great? Seriously, they are interesting, but they can become tedious in places. Frankly, I think even David McCullough can be tedious at times. He's a great historian, but he gets into so much, he knows so much. I think sometimes he needed an editor that could jump in and say, can you say that in fewer words? But anyway, Schlaze is a magna cum laude grad from Yale, and her research and insight is very impressive. And more to come on that Forgotten Man title in a little bit. That has an interesting story behind it. So why these books? What's so important about these books? Well, they offer a lens to see how socialists, and we're mostly talking here about a particular type of socialist called a Western Marxist, how they use crises and fear to make radical change in a society in a very short period of time. And Empower U's already had a couple classes that have delved into Western Marxism. So you can go find those. Dan can help you find them. And I don't have time really to get into that, but we're going to use these books as a lens. So there we go. Okay, so it's 1927. All right, now we're wrenching you all around in time here, aren't we? It's 1927. There are a group of American intellectuals that are getting on a ship, and they're going to sail on this ship, which was the way you traveled back then, right? To Germany, and then they were going to get off. Then they got onto a train, and this group of intellectuals was on their way to Moscow to visit with Stalin and to tour Russia, because they all had great admiration for this new socialist experiment in Russia, and they wanted to bring whatever they could learn back to the United States. So I'm going to talk about briefly here, who was on that trip, what did they do when they came back, and especially what did they do under FDR and even later. Some of these were very influential people that went on this one trip. I'll read them off real quickly. Stuart Chase, he wrote a book called The New Deal, just about the time that FDR started using that term. And he was a big supporter and friend of FDR. He's fairly young at the time, and so he goes into the LBJ era as well. Paul Douglas, some of the older folks here might remember that name. He was an advisor to FDR and later US Senator from Illinois. John Dewey, he is, anybody involved in the education enterprise knows who John Dewey was. He really was the father of modern American progressive education. He was a professor at Columbia, which if you know something about Western Marxism and the Frankfurt School, that's where they did their dirty work. So he was a colleague and friend of those folks. His right-hand man was a man named George Counts. Counts carried out Dewey's ideas. He lived a lot longer than Dewey, so he was able to inject some of the progressive poisons into our public and private educational systems. Rex Tugwell, he was a part of the FDR's first administration, an academic economist, and they were really, frankly, there's too many union leaders that visited there to list them out. The American Union movement was specifically targeted by the Soviet communists for influence and to influence them on what they were going to do back here in the United States. But this was an interesting trip, a great focus for the book. There were lots of other influential Americans that traveled to Stalin's Russia in the 1920s. I'll read off a few of them. Felix Frankfurter, incredibly influential person, founder of the ACLU, one of the founders, close advisor to FDR. later nominated to the US Supreme Court by FDR after he had tried to pack the Supreme Court. And so Roosevelt's plan worked. He just didn't get it legally done, but he intimidated the Supreme Court. There were a number of resignations. And so Frankfurter was one of the folks that FDR tabbed to go on the Supreme Court. He was a key vote in swinging. The Supreme Court made a huge wrenching change from, we'll say, the center or the right to the left in about 3-4 years. Frankfurter got Albert Hiss into government. Albert Hiss was a convicted communist spy. He got Dean Acheson into government. Dean Acheson was a key foreign policy advisor to Truman. Next person, Roger Baldwin. He was a founder and longtime leader of the ACLU, a socialist and a pacifist. Two extremely influential Black leaders, W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a socialist, Paul Robeson, who became a communist. David Lilienthal, student of Frankfurter, FDR confidant, and co-director of the TVA. Finally, Walter Duranty. For well over a decade, the New York Times Moscow correspondent. He lived in Moscow and reported on Moscow back to the New York Times. If you haven't seen the movie Mr. Jones, you need to see it. You need to see it. Mr. Jones, very briefly, shows how Walter Duranty was essentially sort of bribed by a lifestyle or whatever, and maybe he believed in Soviet Russia as well, but he ignored the mass starvation of, I think, several million people in, drum roll, the Ukraine in 1934. Mr. Jones, it's a great movie. Yeah. So what did they do when they came back? Well, when they came back, they wrote 2 big, thick books, and actually one was a two-volume book about their experiences. So the Soviets got great propaganda from this. Okay, we went through the Roaring 20s. All right. Make sure I cover everything. Come on. Does it? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. It's okay. So so in comes, all right, up with this idea, and the title for the book, The Forgotten Man. Here's the story. Where did that come from? All right. So I call it the lie of the forgotten man. So there was a conservative in 1880 that did not like progressives. And he came up with this example of why he didn't like progressivism. And he used letters to represent people, if you think about that, sort of a logical presentation. So here's how I paraphrased it, but here it is. As soon as a person, right, observes something which seems to cause X a problem or suffering, A talks it over with B. They're going to help him. They work to pass a law that requires A, B, and C to help X. Now, there's nothing wrong with A and B wanting to help X, but C might not like the way that they're wanting to help him. He might think it's actually counterproductive. He has no choice because he's been outvoted. A and B have put this new law in, and they're forcing him to, typically this would be to pay taxes. So this conservative used the term forgotten man to represent the taxpayer that was forgotten in this whole enterprise, okay? And so FDR, one of his advisors mentions this term, forgotten man, and FDR completely flipped it in his first major national radio campaign speech. That's kind of big, right? He's introducing himself to America as a campaign, in a campaign. He says that he would stand up for the forgotten man at the bottom of the pyramid. So for him, the forgotten man was the receiver, not the one paying the bills. Amazing. I learned a lot about FDR, and gosh, what little respect I had, I lost as I learned about him. But so here's another thing. What did he do? All right, so J.P. Morgan and Pierre DuPont, who were sort of the Bill Gates and Warren Buffett of their day, all right, they'd go to FDR early in his campaign and say, you know, we're not happy with Hoover and what he's doing here, and we're gonna back you. And obviously there must have been some back and forth in discussions about policies, and J.P. Morgan and DuPont were happy with that. They opened their checkbooks. They gave him a lot of money. Okay, we'll get to that in a minute. And FDR decided that he would be advised mostly by academics, not by practical people working in the world, but he was going to go to the ivory tower for these people that spend a lot of time, no offense to anybody in here in higher ed, but navel gazing. And so the other thing, FDR campaigned that he was more conservative than Hoover. He campaigned as being more conservative than Hoover. And he called for a 25% cut in spending and a balanced budget. That's what he campaigned on. That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Somebody that says one thing and then comes in and has a completely different agenda. So what did FDR do? Well, the first thing, real quickly, he went in, his first speech, he attacked capitalists, and he pretty much attacked Morgan, not by name, but essentially he totally turned and bit the hand that fed him with Morgan and DuPont, totally betrayed them. Now I skipped ahead too far. First term. All right, so what did FDR do? All right, the first 100 days were really quick. A lot of stuff got passed. This is a crisis, right? We got to do something right now. This is an emergency. I think it's so ironic that he says we have nothing to fear but fear itself. They used fear. He used fear to get this done, and people were fearful. I understand that, but still. All right, so I'll run through these quickly. You can see them. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the TVA, FDIC, the Federal Insurance, the Securities Act of 1933. That's the first 100 days, folks. 1934, the Securities and Exchange Act. The Federal Communications Commission was created. The Federal Housing Agency was created. 1935, the Works Progress that built all those things, you know, Works Progress Administration, 1935. National Labor Relations Board, Social Security. 1936, so what does our geniuses at the Federal Reserve do? They drastically reduce the money supply. Okay, so simply put, if you want to slow an economy down, you cut the money supply. If you want to speed an economy up, just look at what Joe Biden did. You expand the money supply, and you will get the economy to respond. You also might get large inflation. FDR couldn't decide what to do with gold. He took us off the gold standard in 33, put us back on. What was all the result of this? And you'll see this in charts in a minute. The economy grows a little bit. Okay, didn't anywhere near come all the way back, but it almost had to snap back. It was so bad. Unemployment stayed very high. First 4 years, he did not get unemployment to go down very much. It was in the range, went from 25% down to about 17, and that's it. That's the first term. Yep, too far. Okay, second term. 37, he announced that court packing plan. That was all courts. He got 5 new justices, though. Like I said, between 37 and 40, totally changed the court. 1937, it's been called the Depression within a depression began. The economy is we haven't gotten the jobs back, right? We haven't gotten the jobs back. There's still a lot of unemployment. Now we go into another downturn. Unemployment begins to rise again. About the lowest it got was, I think, 14%, 16%. I mean, that's pretty high, right? It's really, really high. 1938, got the Minimum Wage Act put in. The only thing that really brought our economy back was the spending that we did to kind of help our European future allies in 1940, and then our own buildup, 1940. That's what brought our economy back, was all that spending and more debt. Okay, what's the legacy? So these things are all, we can see these all today, the legacy of the New Deal. First of all, putting together the Democratic coalition, putting together a group of minority groups. It's not the right word, but I can't come up with it. Fragmented groups, but putting them together to get to at least 51% and win elections. That's what he did. It was a strange coalition. It was Southern whites of all classes. So that means poor Southern whites, but it also means a whole bunch of racists that were still lynching people. FDR was silent about lynching, silent. Mencken was furious. H.L. Mencken, he was furious because he was at FDR, he was a Democrat. And FDR didn't, because he didn't want to lose the solid South. So he kept quiet about that. But he had a lot of programs that gave a lot of money to African Americans, and that swung the African Americans from the Republican camp. They were solid Republicans. I mean, you can imagine Lincoln, Republican Party started to main purpose, end slavery, right? So they were solid Republican until FDR started putting them on the money train, got the African Americans over. Labor unions, who also were not, you could not go, labor, if you were black, you weren't allowed in a labor to go into the labor room to get a job. They practiced segregation completely. And white progressives, some of those smart folks that got on the ship and the train to go over to Russia, that type of folks that thinks that they are so smart they can tell everybody else how to live. And then we have the Democratic strategy. The strategy was, which FDR beat on really hard, make rich capitalists the enemy. That's always popular because, wealthy people aren't real popular, We're jealous. We tend to be jealous, gee, I wish that was me. Must have cheated to get that much money. Had to, Some did, but some don't. Anyway, that was the strategy that they've been using ever since. And of course, Social Security, a lot of welfare programs, federal bureaucracy. It also did damage to the gold standard and the loss of monetary discipline. So we kind of lost control over started to lose control over our money supply. And so look at these pictures. These are amazing. A picture's worth 1,000 words if I can get there we go. Okay, US economy. So let's just focus on, let's see, you can see, okay, Hoover's on the left and FDR. So the first 4 years are Hoover. The rest of them are FDR. Look at that unemployment rate. 1929, the economy still was doing okay. We had the crash, remember I said, but the economy really didn't start to go down until 30. So now we go up to 8%, 15, 23, Hoover's last year. FDR's first year up to 25. Okay, you could say, well, all right, it's going to take a while for his programs to take effect. All right, so how well did they do? It goes down to 21, 20. After 3 years, it's still at 20%. 4 years, it's at 16. 37, now he's down to 14, still double digit, but now we have the depression within a depression. It goes back up. It goes back up. His policies did not work. They did not work. I mean, sure, they worked somewhat, but no. Did his policies get us out of the depression? Numbers don't lie. I know liars figure. I'm not a liar. Numbers don't lie. There they are. The GDP, look at those 3 years, just awful negative growth. The economy shrinking. 8%, down 8, down 6, down 12, down 1, 4 years in a row. Yes, it did bounce back, but it did not bounce anywhere near all the way back. If you run the numbers there, no, we were still operating, our economy was operating at a lower level than when we started into the Depression in 1930. Inflation, we can kind of skip that part of it. It turned out was not a problem. All right, so what'd that do to the Dow? All right, 1929, that's the peak on the left. Okay, see that peak on the left? That's the peak on the left, about 375. The bottom happened about 3 years later in 1932. It was under 50. And it was actually, I think it was an 89% drop. So imagine that if you're retired and you're depending, you right now, back then it was a little different, but a lot of people lived on farms, they could grow their food and so forth. But think about that. What if you did have money back then and you lost 90% of your money? Yeah, that's why you had people jumping off of buildings. Not a good response, but that's why. All right, so yeah, we hit a bottom. Market starts going back up. Now we're going over 25 years. It took 25 years for the Dow to get back to where it was. So nobody wanted to invest in stocks. I mean, as far as the average person, as far as foundations, professional investors, it was not, in fact, it wasn't even considered a prudent investment for a foundation to invest in stocks back then. That only happened many years, like I think in the maybe late 40s, early 50s. Okay, come on. All right, so briefly, so if this is like a little play, then we're at intermission right now because the action stops. All right, World War II and peace. So everything was focused on the war. All these progressive socialist ideas had to be held on at bay because everything was focusing on the war effort. 1945 rolls around, the war is over, we won, and we're the only major industrialized nation that is intact, doesn't have its industrial base destroyed. We've got 15 golden years, tremendous expansion, tremendous prosperity, and it's pretty hard to make a case if you're a socialist, if everybody's doing well. You know, just like 1920, it's pretty hard to make your case. You got to hope that things are bad. You got to root for bad stuff, right? So what do the progressives do? They didn't stop working. They got a long plan. Their plan started like 1912, they were there. They didn't give up. What they did was they worked quietly. We raised I say we, I'm saying this is kind of making it a us versus them, but I'm saying people that weren't socialists were, focusing on raising their families and their communities and starting new businesses and stuff like that. This small core of intellectuals was hard at work taking over institutions. So in higher education, in entertainment, in media, they didn't stop their work. They just did it behind the scenes. And it's proved to be very successful. Now, luckily for the socialists and Marxists, the 60s came along. Great. We got 4 crises. Wow. Awesome. First, the space race, right? Like we're really worried now. Sputnik's up there, and now they've got an astronaut up there. And boy, they beat us to space, and we better catch up. And I agree. I think that was great. So, but the space program did require a lot of spending. And we had the civil rights push, again, great thing, needed, absolutely, for a just society. But that was also a crisis that they could use to their advantage. So they used that to start the Great Society programs of LBJ. And then 1965 rolls around, the Vietnam War really starts to build up with all that spending. So we had 3 big demands for spending on the federal government all coming together at the same time. And they didn't want to raise taxes to pay for it. So then what would they do? Now let's see, we got this printing press called the Federal Reserve, and then we can borrow too. So, all right, we'll do that. You know, why you raise taxes, people kind of get upset about that. And we sure wouldn't want to stop spending. And sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Not that there's anything wrong with rock and roll or sex or drugs if it's medicinal. You define medicinal. Okay. Come on. Okay. So what did LBJ do? All right. A whole group of programs, Vista, the war on poverty. By the way, LBJ declared war on poverty, declared a war on poverty, poverty won. Yeah, I left out a chart. I wish I had it. It shows the poverty rate. If you look at that, you could probably Google it yourself and you'll see the poverty rate did not go down. Yeah, it went down a little bit, but it's pretty steady for over 50 years now. All right, 65, Medicare, Medicaid, HUD, several other acts that I don't have time to get into. They are very important. So I'll just skip through that. Okay, so poor LBJ, he's overwhelmed, and he really was. I do kind of feel sorry for him, but yeah, he was overwhelmed. Spending and debt from those first three crises, and then all the social unrest that was coming from just the whole kind of zeitgeist of the 60s, you know. Balance of payments and gold outflows. So our finances were not good. The gold was flowing at that time. If you had US dollars and you were concerned that the US dollars were going to inflate and be worth less, you shipped them over to New York and presented them to the Federal Reserve, and you got gold and sent gold back to your country. The gold was flowing out like crazy. It was a big economic news item, the flow of gold back then. So what happened? This unleashed the beast of inflation on America for the first time in a long, long time. Unleashed that beast, and it is a beast. It's hard, once it gets out of the cage, it's hard to get back in there. It's hard to kill it. It's hard to get it back in there. It's tough to do it. You got to really make some difficult decisions. We had massive political rallies, marches, and riots. And so LBJ decides not to run for re-election in '68. I think it's fair to say it at least ended as a failed presidency. Not good for our country. So Nixon inherits LBJ's problems. Vietnam War continues, balance of payments and gold outflows continue. Nixon did not really pursue a conservative economic policy. He really did not. He did not pursue a Coolidge, Harding, or a Reagan economic policy. You know, he was moderate to maybe even on the liberal side in terms of economics. Inflation continued, and that's why, because he didn't try to really stop it. And so we all know about Watergate. He resigns in '74, second failed presidency in a row. Come on. Okay, so what's the legacy of the Great Society? What do we see today from the Great Society? I mean, they used crisis and fear to get a lot of change in a short period of time. This is their modus operandi. All right, Medicare and Medicaid, other welfare programs like food stamps and aid to dependent children. The result, generational dependence and entrenched poverty. It's really a tragedy. It really is. It's gotten too many people in our country to think that they can't do, they're capable of doing so much more than they are. It's really sad. Yeah, it's very sad. So what did that do to the economy? We got 15 years of inflation and a stagnant stock market. And I will show you that. If I can get it to advance, come on. Okay, so the black line, what this is a percent, how much of the GDP of the total product of everyone, all goods and services, how much the government was spending first on entitlements. So that's the dark black line. All right, so you see their entitlements were what? Maybe 5% in 1962. They start to go up in 68, 70 with the Great Society programs kicking in. By 1975, they've doubled up to about 9%, and it stays pretty steady there. But this chart only goes out to 2000. I wish it went further, but that's as far as it goes out. What's the dashed line? That's how much we're spending on defense, national defense. That's right in the Constitution. That certainly you'd have to say would be, you know, the first responsibility of any government is protect the country and protect its citizens from foreign threats. So it starts with the dashed line, starts at 9% of GDP. And by 2000, it was down to 3%, 1/3, partially because it's getting, squeezed out by the entitlements. Wait till interest rates go up and we start have to spend a lot more of our federal monies on interest payments. That's going to be interesting. Oh, that's a No pun intended. All right, spending on New Deal and Great Society programs. All right, I'm going to speed this up a little bit. So anyway, all this really shows is this is percent of GDP. The black line was the New Deal from the 30s. The dashed line is the spending from the Great Society. So you can just see how this has all gone up. And so for the total spending, you would add the two together. So more and more and more on entitlements. A lot of these programs are underfunded. Medicare, sorry, Social Security, Medicare, they're way underfunded. They're going to run, the programs will continue, but they will, unless they do something, and the longer they wait, the something is more and more painful. It's like waiting to put money away for retirement until 5 years before. That doesn't work. It doesn't work that way, right? That's what they're doing with Medicare and Social Security. So I don't know what they're going to do, but they sure don't want to tell the public about it, any solution. Okay, and then we had stagflation, which is what they're worried about right now. Stagflation is simply, and you can see that from 1965 to 1980, both unemployment and inflation went up. So inflation went up and it cost jobs. Right now, we have the inflation part. We don't have the unemployment part. We might. Interest rates are now going to have to go up to kind of track the inflation. That's going to slow the economy down, which that should mean more unemployment. But we're not in stagflation yet, but boy, we sure had it for about 15 years. What did that do to the stock market? All right, look at the line here, 1965. This is the Dow, and see that 1,000. So it early 60s stock market did pretty good. It's a small scale, but it did really pretty good from 62 to 66. 66. What do we got? We got Great Society spending kicking in. We got space program, and we've got Vietnam all coming together. It really put a lid, and then causing inflation, put a lid on the market for how many years? From 1966 to 1982. If you had $1,000 in stocks in 1966, you still had $1,000 in 1982. Well, at least I didn't lose money. Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Because $1,000 in 1982 did not go nearly as far as it did in 66, and I'll show you that. Here's a chart that does an inflation adjustment to the Dow. Look at this. This is an amazing chart. So I wrote in 1966. All right. So, and this is inflation adjusted. So it is the same market, just you have to bear with me because the numbers are different. But anyway, see that peak in 1966? Then I drew a line across. How many years? This shows that it took 28 years to get your purchasing power back in the stock market. 28 years. That's what inflation, we have to stop this, folks. We have to demand, I don't know if they'll listen, but we've got to force government to stop this. And this current government, I don't think is going to listen. Because you always blame, we get in the blame game, you always blame somebody else for your, yep, let's see, hold on, sorry. Okay. I want to make sure, okay, good. My aging fingers mustn't be working right for some reason. Come on. Now I go too far. Okay. All right. So here we are. Crisis, fear, action. Gosh, that seems familiar. We've got 3 crises. The racial unrest and Black Lives Matter issues, COVID-19, and of course to that we can add the ever popular climate change. We'll just tack that on too. We've got 3 crises. Gosh, 2 of these are global. Isn't that interesting? That, gosh, yeah, what Rahm Emanuel said, never let a crisis go to waste. Wow, we've got 3. This is great, and it's global. We can create not just change in the United States, we can create change all over the world. So they use lots of fear, scapegoating of capitalism, We've had unprecedented spending and borrowing by the US government and money creation. We've never, to the extent that we've done it in the last 2-3 years, we've never done that before. It really started back in 2008 and 9, but we've gone way beyond that. I mean, they learned a new technique called, basically what they did was the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air, which they can do, and to buy securities, to buy bonds. And they bought huge amounts of debt, government debt, mortgage debt. So, I mean, anyway, but no, they learned that technique, and now they've really ramped it up. We no longer have a gold standard to be a tether or a foundation for our currency. The inflation beast is out there, and now I am done, almost done. Remember that socialist Eugene Debs. Bernie Sanders idolizes him. Bernie Sanders is this, I mean, we know he is a democratic socialist, right? By self-definition. He caucuses with the Democrats. He is a democratic socialist. That is the same party that created that platform that I went over in 1912. They want to end capitalism. That is their stated, you know, if somebody says something, I think we should believe them. That's what they say. And by their actions, that's what they're doing. Bernie Sanders in 1979 produced a documentary praising Eugene Debs, the guy that was the candidate and that founded that American Socialist Party. And I would argue, I think it's pretty easy to see, I don't know what Joe Biden's agenda was. I don't think he knows what his agenda was or is, but I do know that it looks like the policies have been Bernie Sanders policies. It's Bernie Sanders policies, the democratic, so the self-proclaimed democratic socialist. Okay, what legacy will we leave? Only you can answer that. And I'm really going to implore you, this is a call to action. I don't know what you can do, what you feel like you can do. I know you can at least be an informed voter. And that means if you're not sure about somebody, make sure, talk to somebody that you trust, that you know, and talk this around with people. What about this person? And I'm saying, please do that with both parties, because there's a swamp in Washington. I think the swamp in Columbus is even worse. It's even worse. And the deception that happens in Columbus is the things people say they do and say what they say they do and what they really do, totally different. So thank you very much. Dan, I don't know if I ran over my time there or not, but I'll stay.
Round of applause. So I think I got your summation correctly, that these crises that just keep coming up, they're not really coincidence, are they?
Gosh, I don't know. I think some of them are more, I don't know, maybe I don't want to be too naive, but I think it's more they take advantage of a crisis. I think that's what happens. The socialists look at a crisis, and like in education, Dewey looked at that. They were convinced this is in the Depression, this is the end of capitalism. So they literally said this: we need to create an American educational system to train the children for their socialist future. And that's why you see a lot of the features in our education today. That's why you see all the group work. Individualism is out. It's out. It's all group work. It's all cooperative, working with a whole bunch of people. That's why it's there. And they do call it progressive education.
Let's take a couple questions. Anybody want to ask our speaker anything that they found kind of interesting about the time frame? Anybody? Okay, hold tight.
My name is Don, and I feel one problem we have, people who lean right tend to be more individualistic, and we don't form groups to get things done, you know. And judging from my mail, I get, there must be at least 50 organizations. All of them have a different goal, you know. There's Tea Party, Freedom Works, and I'm sure all you can name many more. Seems to me that somehow we've got to come together so we can be effective. I mean,
Yeah, short answer, I agree. We're too many silos and there's too many, Dan, I know with working with against critical race theory, we've kind of seen that where people have their turf and they come up, this is our idea. And plus, if they are paying salaries out, they have to figure out ways to raise money. And so they tend to keep their mailing lists to themselves and keep control of their people. You know, there's not nearly enough cooperation. I agree. Yeah.
Here's a question right here.
My name is Dick. I see politicians sworn in to the Constitution, put their hand on the Bible and swear the Constitution, uphold the Constitution. I wonder if they've ever read it. And I also wonder why in a Supreme Court decision, why it wouldn't be 9-4 or 9 against. Why the division in the Supreme Court about the Constitution?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't answer obviously about whether they've read the Constitution. I know most politicians don't care about the Constitution. They care about re-election. That's the first, second, and third most important things on their mind. Most of them, not all, but I'd say 90%, it's re-election. Re-election means money. And so, but to your other question, what was the other question about? Okay. So they have different judicial philosophies. That's why. And the left-leaning jurists are much more practical. And they remember where I was saying here, where the socialists didn't want a strong federal judiciary. They wanted a constitution that was very pliable. So a lot of them believe in kind of a living constitution, that it can change and it should reflect the changes in society, not this document that was an agreement, a compact between 13 colonies and then all the other states that were joined them later. They don't look at it that way. They think it can be changed. And so they're also more outcomes based. They're looking at outcomes and they want to, it's almost like this forgotten man thing. They're looking at, I think a lot of times they do think that they're helping people and they don't want to issue a decision that hurts someone. So they prioritize, we'll call it equity over law. They don't look at, they look at ways around, and a lawyer can always find some way to make any argument, right? And they look around the law, like Roe versus Wade. That came from a penumbra, a shadow. It's not in abortion's not in the Constitution, but there's a shadow there. And they detected this shadow, a penumbra, that told them that there was a right to an abortion in the Constitution. Yes.
Yeah, great talk. Really important stuff. You talked a bit about inflation and federal spending and creating money to buy bonds to increase the debt, and have highlighted how this is particularly accelerated since 2008. I mean, just massively. And I've always had a hard time sort of understanding that because both parties do it. And it seemed important to me at first, but it seems like no one really cares about it anymore. And then I recently discovered modern monetary theory, which says that it's not important and it doesn't make a difference. Could you comment on that and maybe also comment on why hasn't inflation kicked in until just this past year if we've been printing this much money since 2008?
Yeah. Hey, that's a real good question. And I think sometimes the smartest thing you can say is, I don't know. So I am going to say to part of your question, why hasn't it happened so far? I don't know. I thought it would happen back the last time when this is, by the way, we're doing things that we've never done before. Like, that the one vaccine that goes after the corona, that's new. That's brand new. Maybe it's fine. I don't know. I don't like to be a pioneer though. Pioneers have the arrow in the back. I'd rather sorry, I'm a coward. Let somebody else go out there and brave the arrows. But this monetary, they call it QE, quantitative expansion, this policy where the Federal Reserve, this was brand new. Nobody had ever tried it before. It was an experiment that they tried. It was a big experiment on the US economy where the Federal Reserve can create money. They created money to go out and buy bonds. And they said, oh, that sounds, buy bonds, what's that? They got control, big control of major parts of the US economy by doing that. I think they basically pretty much, it's either indirectly or directly, but they control the student loan market now, almost all. If they write off these student loans, you're all going to be paying for it. Or at least you're going to be on it's not private companies. After the insurance, it ends up going back to the federal government. They also took over even junk, now they're buying junk bonds. They're buying junk bonds. Low credit quality bonds. They are deeply involved in the US economy.
We've got one last
modern monetary theory is crazy. There's a simple answer. It's crazy.
Tom, we've got time
But
for
we're doing
one last question right here.
Yeah.
Oh,
If everyone here seems to be sort of in agreement that there is an issue here, I think what we need to do is this group needs to get online on the internet and reach out to the generation that is now 30 something and 40 something. They are the ones that are out there. They're the ones that are doing the news out there on the internet. They're the ones that have gone out and they're finding the information that no one is getting on the mainstream media. And so I encourage you to get on the internet. If you can't, you need to find a grandchild to help you get on there.
thank you for that. Let's
Yeah.
thank our guest tonight, Tom Hagedorn.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Just a couple real quick things. Tom, you just have such a way of summarizing things. Thank you so much. Jed, modern monetary policy. Leanne, would you write that down for an Empower You class? We'll do that. Listen, real quick, I've got to tell you about Saturday's class. It's part one of another class being taught later. It deals with that right over there about the debt. The class on Saturday says that you can get a group of legislators to fix a major federal problem like the debt without having to work with the Constitution. That's Saturday's class. Later, the last class of the year, we'll have a group called the Constitution of States that says the only way we're ever going to fix that problem is if we take the debt out of the Congress's hands. It's two different approaches, and you really should hear them both to see how you feel about which one is right, whether we need to do something with the Constitution to fix the problem, or whether we just can't count on Congress to do anything. We have to take it out of their hands. So part one on Saturday. Part two is, Betty, can you give me the date for that Constitution of States? April 26th. So those are two-part classes. An answer to your question, sir, about groups getting together, you're absolutely right. There is a group that's being put together right now called the Ohio Freedom Action Group. It's being put together out of Cleveland, and what it attempts to do is to link all the patriot groups around the state of Ohio to work for one thing. That's not an easy job, but that is happening. Thanks so much for coming tonight. Sorry we kept you over a little bit, but go out tonight, do great things, empower you, and we look forward to the Being Prepared class on Tuesday. We'll hope to see you there. Thank you, everybody. Anybody interested in the National Men's Conference event, please come. I'll give you one of these up here. Thank you.